Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. The sun was an anvil of molten brass hammered flat against the horizon, its last cruel rays illuminating the hand-painted letters on the sign Alara held. Outcast, traitor, unclean. The wood was rough, the splinters gouging the soft skin of her palm, but the shame carved deeper. Her third trimester belly strained the cheap muslin of her dress, a stark visual accusation for the 23 unforgiving members of the new Canaanite wagon train, who ringed her like jackals around a dying calf. The air, thick with the scent of pine smoke and human contempt, was perfectly still, save for the rhythmic, deliberate drumming of her heart against her ribs, a wild, trapped bird desperate for freedom. Her husband, Jedediah, the man who had pledged his soul before God and the elders, stood nearest the wagon, his chin lifted high in practiced righteousness, his gaze cold and distant, a betrayal sharper than any knife. He did not look at her. He looked at the sign, confirming the verdict with his silence, confirming that the life she carried, the children he now refused, had made her worthy only of the dust beneath their collective heel. The wagon train was moving, a slow, methodical migration of rejection, leaving her behind with nothing but a canteen half filled with tepid water and the crushing, desolate weight of the unforgivable future she now faced alone. The metallic taste of pure adrenaline and panic coated the back of Alara's throat as the last wagon wheel spun away, kicking up a final plume of the blood-red dust that was now her prison. She was alone at Dry Fork Crossing, a place whose name promised nothing but thirst and abandonment, 70 miles from the nearest proper settlement, and weeks of travel from anywhere safe. Her mind, usually sharp and quick, felt dull, heavy with the realization that the man she had loved had chosen the judgment of his community over the life of his wife and unborn children. A fierce wind, cold and sudden despite the lingering heat of the day, whipped around her, tearing at her thin dress and rustling the dry, brittle brush. It carried a sound that was not the desert, a sound that should not exist in this lonely, haunted place. The quiet, measured thudding of a horse's hooves, approaching from the direction of the forbidden lands beyond the mesas. Panic tightened its icy grip on her lungs, forcing shallow, rattling breaths. She spun clumsily, the movement jarring the painful stiffness in her lower back, her eyes desperately scanning the twilight-drenched landscape for a place to hide. A boulder, a ravine, anything that could swallow her whole before whatever or whoever was coming could find the pitiful remnants of the woman the righteous had left to die. The rider materialized from the shadow of a colossal split butte, a silhouette against the fading, bruised purple sky. He was not white. He was Apache, tall and solid on a spotted, muscular pony. He wore buckskin and carried a rifle that gleamed faintly in the failing light, but it was his face, framed by long dark hair and etched with a severity that hinted at endless journeys, that froze the blood in Alara's veins. His name, she would learn later, was Chunto, meaning silent hunter. But at that moment, he was simply the embodiment of every cautionary, terrifying tale the elders had ever hissed around the campfire. The horse stopped 20 feet away, the dust settling around its hooves, and Chunto simply waited, his eyes, dark and ancient, fixed not on her face, but on the humiliating sign clasped in her hands, and the immense swell of her belly beneath the torn fabric. The silence stretched taut, vibrating with unspoken history and mortal fear, a silence broken only by the uneasy snorting of his horse and the sound of the wind whispering through the dried canyon grasses. Alara couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even pray. She could only stand there, a monument to Christian rejection, waiting for the inevitable judgment this wilderness warrior was surely bringing. Chunto dismounted with an economy of motion that spoke of lethal grace, his eyes never leaving her. He took 2 slow, deliberate steps toward her, the soft crunch of his moccasins the loudest sound in the dying world. Alara finally found her voice, a dry, cracked whisper that barely escaped her lips. "Stay back!" she choked out, instinctively shifting her body to shield her unborn children, her hands trembling so violently she almost dropped the sign of her shame. Chunto stopped, his expression unreadable, a complex mask of sorrow, recognition, and something deeper, something that felt like a quiet, terrible knowledge. He looked at the vast empty space where the wagon train had vanished, then back to the woman abandoned with a life inside her, and he seemed to measure the depth of the white man's cruelty against the vastness of the land. It was a long, painful assessment, an acknowledgement of a history of broken treaties and broken hearts, culminating in this singular, absurd moment of shared desolation. Then Chunto spoke. His voice was a low, resonant rumble, utterly devoid of threat, but thick with an unexpected, heavy sincerity that cut through the terror and reached the hollow core of her heart. He used the few, carefully chosen English words he knew, the words taught to him by his own kin, who had traded peacefully with the scattered frontier posts. He stepped closer, reaching a hand out not for a weapon, but for the hateful sign, and gently pulled the piece of wood from her paralyzed grip, dropping it silently into the red dirt. He looked directly into her eyes, a bold, unwavering gaze, and delivered the final, shocking line of the night, a line that defied all expectation and shattered the silence of her despair, replacing it with a terror of an entirely different kind. He looked down at her protruding abdomen, then back to her face, and spoke the sentence that served as both a horrifying command and a desperate plea. "Please come with me. Your children need a father." Alara stumbled back a half step, the sheer audacity of the Apache man's request momentarily eclipsing her fear of him. The dust of her exile still clung to her dress, and the echo of Jedediah's condemnation still rang in her ears. Yet here was a man from the land Jedediah's people called heathen, offering a future so impossible it tasted like madness. Her mind raced, grasping for a logical thread in the tapestry of this nightmare. A father? This savage stranger, whose people had been painted as bloodthirsty demons by every preacher in the wagon train, knew nothing of her, nothing of the life she carried, nothing of the twin boys Jedediah had rejected, believing them to be the spiritual curse of a past, unnamed sin. She squinted at him, trying to pierce the gathering gloom and the stoic mask of his face, searching for the malice that had to be lurking beneath the words. Was this some new, perverse form of torment? Was he simply playing a cruel game before dragging her into the unknown canyons to meet a fate even worse than slow starvation? The air between them crackled with the energy of two worlds colliding, the world of pious condemnation and the world of brutal, unyielding survival. And she realized with a sickening clarity that she was now adrift between them, belonging nowhere. Chunto saw the naked terror and distrust in her eyes, a look he had seen countless times aimed at his people. But this time, he recognized the unique desperation of a woman cornered, protecting her young. He slowly lowered his outstretched hand, demonstrating a patience she didn't expect, allowing her space to process the impossible claim. He knew he had few words of her language and that every syllable he uttered would be weighed against generations of ingrained prejudice. He began to speak again, his voice lower this time, infused with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to the truth of the desert. He did not speak of love or partnership, which she would instantly dismiss as deceit, but of necessity and lineage. He pointed first to her swollen abdomen, a gesture of profound respect that somehow felt less invasive than the judgmental stares of her own people, and then, slowly, deliberately, he tapped the silver and turquoise band on his wrist. It was a distinctive piece, etched with a pattern she vaguely recognized from a dusty, forgotten map in her father's wagon, a pattern associated with the remote, powerful clan of the Indeed deep within the mountains. He spoke two names, not English, but names that felt like stone and water, Yazi and Dine. The words meant nothing to her, but the emotion behind them, The fierce, contained pride of possession and responsibility was unmistakable. Then, he spoke the English words that cracked the wall of her defense. My sister's boys, 10 and 8 summers. He looked at her belly again, then at the canyons looming behind him. They lose their mother. They need mother. They need the balance. He paused, letting the magnitude of his request settle over her. He wasn't asking her to be a wife. He was asking her to fill an empty sacred space in a family suddenly stripped of its female center. He was offering a terrifying exchange, her life and the survival of her unborn children, in exchange for her presence and labor as a surrogate mother to 2 orphaned Apache boys. The tension in the air shifted from fear to a staggering, agonizing decision, a choice between certain death by abandonment and uncertain survival among the supposed enemy. Alara's own twins stirred within her. 2 distinct, powerful kicks that felt like a painful affirmation of her decision. Survival. That was the only creed left to her. She looked from the vast, empty trail where her former community had vanished, a trail leading only to her grave, to the imposing quiet warrior offering a path into the unknown darkness. The Apache man, Chunto, stood patiently, letting the desert render its own judgment. She needed to know the truth of the lineage, the real connection. Why me? She rasped, the question tearing at her dry throat. Why not your own women? Chunto's eyes narrowed slightly, a flash of ancient, profound grief crossing his face before it returned to the stoic mask. He explained, slowly, agonizingly, that the mother of the boys, his sister, had carried the secret of her own mixed blood, a quiet, long-buried secret rooted in a forgotten frontier post, and that those specific children carried the faint, pale hair and green eyes of a distant white ancestor. They are split, he whispered, the word heavy with both sorrow and fear for their acceptance in the unforgiving traditional world. You, he gestured to her, the blonde woman carrying a white child. You make the split whole. You make them safe to be both. The profound implications settled upon Alara like a physical weight. Jedediah had cast her out for carrying children he feared were tainted by an unknown past. Chunta was pulling her in precisely because she could legitimize the taint within his own orphan nephews. It was a bizarre, cruel mirror image of rejection and acceptance, separated by a single canyon. She looked into the man's eyes again, seeing not malice, but a desperate, calculating necessity, a profound need for a mother figure to protect 2 fragile boys who were neither fully one world nor the other. She was not being offered a life of comfort. She was being offered a life of dangerous, essential duty. Taking a deep, ragged breath that brought the sharp scent of desert sage and the unfamiliar smell of buckskin into her lungs, she made the decision that sealed her fate, the decision that meant she would never see her old life again, that she would become a legend, a ghost, in the history of the new Canaanite wagon train. She pushed off the ground, bracing her tired body, and faced him, her voice firm, stripped of its fear. Take me to your sister's boys, she commanded, the sentence marking the final, irrevocable break from the world that had cast her out. But you must promise me this. My children, when they are born, will be protected the same way. The journey into the high desert mesas began immediately, a desperate race against the final drop in temperature that marked the deep canyon night. Alara was mounted behind Chunto, her large frame awkwardly balanced on the pony's rump, her arms wrapped tightly around his solid waist, clinging to the only lifeline left to her. The raw, leathery smell of his traditional garments, mixed with the musky scent of horse sweat and sage, was overwhelming, a dizzying intoxication of foreignness that stood in stark contrast to the sterile, judgmental scents of the wagon train. Every jarring step of the sure-footed pony sent a sharp ache through her weary bones, forcing her to focus solely on the rhythm of the ride, a primal, rhythmic meditation on survival. She dared not look down into the inky blackness of the ravines they skirted, trusting implicitly, terrifyingly, in the quiet confidence of the man who guided them. She felt the heavy rifle shifting against Chunto's back, a constant sharp reminder that she was traveling with a warrior, a fact that both terrified her and offered the strange, paradoxical comfort of knowing she was now protected by the very danger the frontier was taught to fear. She closed her eyes, letting the cold night wind whip the tears dry on her cheeks, accepting that her old life, with its false safety and fatal conditional love, was now irrevocably behind her. Chunto rode with the silent, innate authority of a man traversing his own home, his senses acutely tuned to the subtle language of the desert floor. He understood the woman's terror, the physical strain of the ride on her body, and the crushing weight of the decision she had just made, but he could not afford to offer comfort. Their passage had to be swift, silent, and invisible, a shadow moving between the rocks, because the lands beyond Dry Fork Crossing were never truly empty. The remnants of Jedediah's people, though morally bankrupt, were still dangerous, potentially sending out scouts in the morning, and the presence of a lone white woman with an Apache warrior would be a declaration of war. He spoke only once, a low, guttural murmur meant to soothe the horse and offer a brief warning to the woman. "Hold tight, past the Watcher's Rock." The phrase was meaningless to Alara, but the sudden sharp shift in his posture, a tightening of his grip on the reins, a slight tilt of his head toward the black wall of the canyon, communicated urgency. For 5 long minutes they traversed a narrow ledge, the pony's hooves finding purchase on rock where no purchase seemed possible, before Chunto finally eased the pace, allowing a slow, deliberate exhale that told Alara the most immediate danger had passed, leaving behind a profound sense of the precarious world he inhabited. The destination was not a village, but a single, ancient dwelling tucked deep inside a high rock alcove, shielded entirely from view by a curtain of heavy, thick juniper brush. Chuntar slid off the pony, his movements fluid and quick, and then gently helped Alara descend, supporting the weight of her belly with a respectful, steady hand that conveyed only strength, not desire. The small earthen dwelling was surprisingly warm, retaining the heat of the day and illuminated by a sputtering fire nestled in a central hearth. The air inside was thick with the rich, unfamiliar scents of roasted game, dried herbs, and something else. A clean, smoky aroma that spoke of a different kind of home. 2 small figures were huddled near the hearth. 2 boys, a flash of fair hair visible on the elder, but both dressed identically in soft brown buckskin. They turned at the sound of the entrance, their large, luminous eyes wide with a quiet, heartbreaking mixture of fear and profound, guarded hope, fixed immediately on the strange, heavily pregnant white woman who stood awkwardly framed in the doorway. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of orphaned loss and the shocking reality of Alara's arrival. The younger boy, Yazzie, dark-eyed and slight, scooted closer to his older brother, Dine, who possessed a startling, almost painful resemblance to Alara's own expected twins, with his pale, sun-bleached hair and curious green eyes. This visual connection was a punch to Alara's soul, a sudden, blinding realization that the blood ties Chunto spoke of were far closer than she imagined. Dine, the protector, spoke first, his voice a reedy, nervous question in his native tongue. Chunto responded in the same language, his tone firm yet gentle, introducing Alara not as a stranger, but with a title that held a lifetime of expectation. Alara watched their faces as Chunto spoke, the initial confusion, the guarded suspicion, and then a slow dawning comprehension, especially in the eyes of Dine, the older boy, who seemed to instantly understand the necessity of this impossible arrangement. Chunto turned to Alara, offering her a bowl of rich, savory stew, a primal offering of sustenance and acceptance that bypassed language and prejudice. "Eat," he instructed simply, gesturing to the fire. He then looked at the 2 boys, who were still staring, and offered a final, definitive decree that set the stage for their new, fragile family. "This is Eshkane, Mother. You protect her. She protects you." He then looked back at Alara, his eyes dark and serious, completing the bargain struck in the desert dust. He spoke of the danger they were in, not just from her former community, but from others who hunted those who crossed the lines between worlds. You stay here. You learn the canyons. You heal the boys. I hunt. I watch. We survive. He stated, his final words a profound promise that echoed the silent prayer in Alara's own heart. He was not asking for love. He was asking for a covenant of survival, the only currency that mattered in this relentless land. And Alara, looking at the hungry, hopeful eyes of the two orphaned boys, knew she had found the reason for her abandonment. She was meant to be here, filling a void greater than her own pain. The stew tasted of wild meat and the earth itself, a nourishing, vital warmth that spread through Alara's exhausted body, chasing away the lingering chill of abandonment and fear. She ate slowly, deliberately, acutely aware of the 4 pairs of eyes fixed upon her in the small firelit shelter, Chunto's, watchful and distant, and the boys, probing and desperately curious. Dine, the elder, sat ramrod straight, his small frame betraying the immense weight of the loss he had endured, his gaze a calculated inventory of her movements, her expressions, searching for any sign of the fragile commitment Chunto had just made on her behalf. Yazi, the younger, was less guarded, his dark eyes occasionally darting to her pregnant belly, his small brow furrowed in a confusion that mirrored her own. How could this strange, fair-skinned woman, smelling faintly of the outside world, suddenly become the Eshkane his life demanded? The silence, broken only by the gentle crackle of the fire and the low, hungry sounds of Alara eating, was an education in itself. It taught her that in this world, words were scarce and precious, and that trust was not given easily. It had to be earned through every shared meal, every careful glance, every moment of sustained, quiet presence. She realized that she wasn't just a protector here, she was an exhibit, a strange artifact thrust into their careful, mourning existence, and her performance would determine the fate of all 3 children. Chunto, sensing the suffocating tension, broke the silence with a quiet history lesson that was more self-defense than storytelling. He spoke in broken, careful English, ensuring Alara understood the deep, fragile roots of the family she was now joining, lifting the veil on the split he had mentioned earlier. He told her of his sister, Nahili, the boy's mother, a woman of powerful spirit and skill who had, years ago, been forced to flee a settlement far to the north, carrying the secret of the boy's father, a kind, well-meaning, but ultimately cowardly white scout who had abandoned her before their birth. Chonto spoke of his sister's shame, her fierce determination to raise her sons in the traditional ways, and her eventual, quiet death from a fever that swept through the nearby trading post only weeks ago. The revelation was stark, brutal, and utterly devoid of self-pity, painting a picture of 2 children carrying the burden of mixed identity, made orphans by forces beyond their control. This wasn't just a simple arrangement, it was the completion of a fractured family circle, a necessary balance demanded by the dead. As Chunto spoke, the emotional stakes escalated dramatically. He explained that Dine's pale hair and eyes were not merely traits, they were targets. The Apache tradition, though generally accepting of those with mixed blood who stayed true to the path, faced increasing pressure from both aggressive white settlers and increasingly purist factions within their own tribes who saw the mixed blood children as harbingers of weakness. He revealed that he had traveled for weeks, watching the wagon trails, knowing that only a woman already cast out, one carrying children seen as equally impure, would be desperate enough and perhaps spiritually aligned enough to take on this perilous responsibility. "You are rejected," he stated, his dark eyes piercing hers. "They are almost rejected. We need you to hold the shadow." This blunt honesty, this recognition of her shame as a qualification, was a strange comfort. It validated the pain of her abandonment, transforming her humiliation into a tool for survival and revealing Chunto's own motives as a calculated, selfless act of kin protection. He was a master strategist, not a man of sentimentality, and that cold logic was far more reassuring than any false promises of love. Alara felt the story sink into her, rooting itself beside her own secret pain. The twins Jedediah believed were not his, though they were, but were instead the products of a prophecy of sin whispered by the wagon train's fanatic preacher. She realized the boy's pale eyes were the reflection of her own internal battle, and the shared vulnerability created an immediate unspoken bond. She took a deep breath, the decision firming in her heart, and set the empty bowl aside. She didn't have to love Chonto. She didn't have to understand their customs fully. She just had to be a mother. She looked directly at Dine, whose small, tense face was alight with the reflected firelight, and offered a soft, wordless smile. Not the bright, easy smile of her past, but a quiet, burdened expression of shared sorrow. It was a pattern break, the first emotional beat in the tense, silent room. Dine, who had not cried since his mother was laid to rest in the high rocks, responded with a barely perceptible softening of his rigid shoulders, a sign that the pack was shifting from a political necessity to a human possibility. Chonto watched the exchange, a flicker of something close to approval in his stern features. He pointed to the far corner, where a small pile of blankets lay, a simple bed of woven reed mats. "Sleep," he ordered, his voice still low, but now tinged with the exhaustion of his long, anxious journey. "The sun brings the eyes. Tomorrow, you meet the mountain." He made it clear that her life was now defined by the rules of the canyons, a life of constant vigilance and absolute dependence on his guidance. As Alara moved stiffly to the sleeping area, her shadow dancing large and distorted on the earthen wall, she looked one last time at the two boys. Yazzie was already nodding off, his small head resting against his brother's shoulder. Dine, however, was still watching her, his green eyes luminous and alert in the dim light. He shifted slightly and, without taking his eyes off her, spoke a single, quiet word in English, a word he must have learned from his mother, a profound recognition of her acceptance. "Welcome." It was a powerful emotional twist, a small, fragile opening in the wall of his guarded heart, proving that the deepest connections transcend language and that the path to earning their trust was now officially open. The sun rose with brutal efficiency, replacing the cold terror of the night with the exhausting reality of survival in the high country. Alara found that the safety of the rock alcove came at the price of relentless physical exertion. Her body, accustomed to the soft confinement of wagon travel, protested every climb, every descent, every careful step required to navigate the jagged, unforgiving terrain. Chunto was a patient but demanding instructor, teaching her the Apache way of the desert, how to read the tiny signs of water hidden beneath dry riverbeds, how to find shade where none seemed to exist, and how to move silently, blurring the line between human and landscape. He did not ask her to be a warrior, but he required her to be resilient, insisting that the survival of her unborn twins depended on her ability to endure the daily grind of the canyons. He taught her the names of the plants, the feel of the different stones, and the paths of the wind, using single, sharp words in his native tongue, forcing her to absorb the knowledge through necessity and repetition. Every lesson was stripped bare of kindness, focused solely on utility, yet in his unwavering expectation of her competence, Alara found a profound, unexpected respect that had been absent in her previous life, where her worth had been defined by her obedience and fragility. The tension between Alara and the two boys was a silent, persistent presence, a delicate thread woven through the fabric of their days. Dine, the oldest, remained a challenging, watchful sentry, his green eyes tracking her every mistake, his disappointment masked by a practiced, adult stoicism. He was the ghost of his mother's pain and the reluctant custodian of his brother, and he clearly resented the intrusion of the slow, clumsy woman who claimed the sacred title of Eshkane by Chonto's decree. Yazzie, however, was slowly beginning to crack the wall of his grief. His small requests for comfort were unspoken, a hesitant touch of her hand, a slight leaning against her leg while she rested. but the needs were raw and obvious. One afternoon, while Alara struggled to gather wood for the fire, Yazzie appeared silently and, with the serious demeanor of a seasoned veteran, showed her the dry, brittle pieces of juniper that burned hottest and longest, his action a small, wordless offering of instruction and acceptance. This simple act was a pattern break, a shift from passive observation to active collaboration, and Alara rewarded him not with praise, which she sensed he would reject, but with a quiet, genuine smile and a shared moment of silent mutual effort that bypassed the need for language entirely, deepening the emotional stakes of their fragile new family. The most difficult lesson came on the third day, a sharp, humiliating confrontation designed to test her commitment. Chonto led them to a high shelf overlooking a winding trail far below, a place where the sun bleached the world white and exposed every living thing. He pointed down to a dried, sun-baked carcass of a deer, its bones picked clean. "What do you see?" he asked, his voice low and firm. Alara, focused on the tragic waste of the animal, responded, "A lost deer. Starvation." Chunto shook his head slowly, his eyes burning with a deep, uncompromising wisdom. "No, I see choice. The man who kills must follow the blood. The man who does not follow the blood loses everything. You follow the easy path with the white man. You starve here. You follow the difficult path with the mountain. You live." He then gestured towards her swollen belly, a clear, unmistakable implication that the life inside her was not free, but a consequence of a choice that now demanded sacrifice. This wasn't just about tracking. It was about the brutal, uncompromising philosophy of the desert, where there was no room for self-pity or regret, only necessary action. That evening, the emotional rhythm of the camp shifted sharply. As the boys slept, Alara sat by the dying fire, unable to shake the weight of Chunto's words. She realized that her marriage to Jedediah had been a slow starvation of the spirit, based on easy promises and a fear of truth. Here, in the relentless canyon, every breath was earned, every choice mattered. She looked at Chunto, who was methodically cleaning his rifle, his silhouette imposing and quiet against the rock wall. She felt compelled to address the one remaining unspoken thread of the mystery, the twins she carried, the children whose supposed impurity had led to her abandonment. "My husband," she began, her voice a rough whisper, "he rejected them. He believed they were a curse, that they came from a great sin." She revealed the shame that had followed her for months, the silent accusation of the community. Chunto stopped cleaning the rifle, his large hands resting on the cold steel. He looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes was staggering, a sudden, piercing shift from teacher to confidant. He did not offer comfort or denial. He offered a different perspective, a revelation that both shocked and empowered her. "The Natty do not curse the coming of life. We only fear the weakness of the spirit," he asserted. Then came the "wait, what?" moment, the twist that recontextualized her entire world. He spoke of an old Apache legend, a prophecy whispered among certain mountain clans, that when the two worlds, white and red, had suffered enough betrayal and loss, two children would be born in the heart of the canyon, carrying the blood of both sides. Children meant to be a bridge, a necessary balance, not a curse. He pointed to her belly, then to the vast, encompassing darkness of the canyon. "The white man sees a curse. The mountain sees a beginning. Your shame is their holy shadow. They are not Jedediah's. They are the canyons." This powerful reframing of her pain transformed the simple act of survival into a sacred, urgent mission, confirming that the very vulnerability that had doomed her in one world was the essential qualification for her survival in this one. The revelation of the canyon prophecy changed the internal dynamic of the small group instantly. Alara's shame, once a crippling weight, transformed into a kind of fierce, protective destiny. She no longer saw herself as a discarded woman. She was the custodian of a necessary future, a powerful shift that stiffened her spine and focused her purpose. The next morning, she climbed the steepest part of the trail without complaint, fueled by an inner resolve that surprised even Chunto. She began to observe the boys with new eyes, seeing not just orphans, but the precursors to her own twins, and she recognized the same fierce, guarded spirit in Dine that she was nurturing in herself. The older boy's surveillance relaxed slightly as he saw the change in her, the new competence in her movements, the fire in her eyes, a silent acknowledgement that she was earning her place, one blistered step at a time. The quiet days were spent gathering wood and water, learning the intricate vital knots for securing supplies, and absorbing Chunto's silent lessons on reading the distant smoke signals on the horizon. The faint shifting plumes that marked either friendly clans or the dangerous advance of settlers and soldiers. The sensory language of the desert became her new vernacular. The gritty taste of the dry air, the feel of the rough leather against her skin, the sharp, metallic tang of the canyon wind, warning of an impending shift in weather or threat. The emotional escalation continued with the sudden introduction of a new, complex threat. Chonto, returning late one evening from a hunting expedition that had taken him far into the foothills, carried not just game, but a profound, unnerving anxiety that tightened the air the moment he stepped back into the alcove. He spoke in low, clipped tones, drawing a crude map on the earth with the tip of his hunting knife, marking a series of newly established military patrol routes that were pressing closer to their hidden location. He revealed the grim truth of the region. The White Scout patrols were led by a notoriously cruel man named Captain Thorne, known for his relentless pursuit of Apache families, often blurring the lines between military action and outright bounty hunting. But the true "wait, what?" moment came when Chunto described the composition of one of Thorne's advanced scouting teams, a group that included a man of mixed blood, a skilled tracker known as Whisper for his silent movements, who had once been loyal to his mother's people but had traded allegiance for protection and silver. Chunto leaned close, lowering his voice until it was almost lost in the crackle of the fire, and delivered the shocking secret he had guarded since he rescued her. The scout known as Whisper was the biological father of Dine and Yazi, the same cowardly scout who had abandoned Nahili years ago. The children's pale eyes were not from a distant past, but from a very present, immediate threat. "He hunts his own," Chunto whispered, the betrayal evident in the dark intensity of his face. "He knows the places. He knows the blood." The emotional stakes spiked violently. The boys were not just threatened by general prejudice. They were being hunted by their own father, a man who had chosen the power of the white military over the life of his sons. Ilara looked at Dine, asleep by the fire, his pale hair shining faintly, and a sudden, fierce rush of protective rage flooded her heart. She understood true betrayal now, not just the rejection of a husband, but the calculated abandonment of a father who was now an active, lethal threat. This new revelation forced a critical strategic and emotional shift. Ilara's mission was no longer simply survival. It was protection from a specific, intelligent enemy who held intimate knowledge of the land and the children. She pressed Chunto for details, recognizing that understanding the threat was the first step toward neutralizing it. She asked about Whisper's weaknesses, his habits, the places he avoided, recognizing that his divided loyalties might offer a tactical advantage. Chunto, seeing the fierce, cold logic in her questions, a resilience born of her own betrayal, treated her not as a dependent, but as a genuine partner in the fight. He explained that Whisper possessed the hunter's cunning but lacked the true warrior's soul, operating from a place of fear and self-preservation, always prioritizing his own safety over the mission. He was the epitome of the no-credibility builder mistake, a character whose flaws, cowardice and self-interest, were the key to his defeat. The story thread of the hidden enemy was now sharply defined. Ilara looked at the brass lever of her own fate, realizing that her past, her knowledge of the white man's mentality, and her deep internal drive to protect the unborn had given her a unique position in this conflict. She spent the rest of the night learning the layout of the canyon exit points, calculating the time it would take to flee if they were compromised, her mind working with the cold precision of a general planning a defense. She also started an important new ritual. Before sleep, she would place a small, smooth river stone she'd found near the hearth on the floor between the sleeping boys, a silent symbolic gesture of her promise to create a physical and emotional bridge between the two worlds. It was a repeated action that now had a powerful payoff, a commitment to never repeating Whisper's unforgivable betrayal. The threat of Whisper and the approaching patrols intensified the isolation of their canyon refuge, forcing the small, fractured family to bond out of sheer necessity. Chunto's scouting missions became longer and more perilous, leaving Alara alone with the two boys for stretches of an entire day, a period that proved to be the crucible of their relationship. The shift was subtle but profound, moving the energy from high alert to quiet, shared responsibility. Without Chunto's imposing presence, the boys, particularly Dine, began to relax their guard. Alara stopped trying to imitate the lightness of the Apache women and instead embraced her own strengths, her knowledge of English, her ability to mend clothes, and her surprisingly calming singing voice, which she used to lull Yazzie to sleep at night. She began to teach them simple English phrases, framing the lessons not as instruction, but as a secret code that only their family shared, an emotional rhythm that broke the cycle of tension. One afternoon, while Chunto was away, the long emotional beat finally arrived. Yazzie, having watched Alara struggle with a heavy load of firewood, approached her with a small, beautifully carved wooden bird, a wren, its wings spread in perpetual flight. He shyly held it out, his dark eyes wide with uncertainty. Alara, recognizing this as the first true gift, the first voluntary movement of his heart toward her, accepted it with a reverence that spoke volumes. She did not overwhelm him with praise. Instead, she placed it carefully on her shelf and looked at him with quiet, honest gratitude. Yazzie then led her to a narrow fissure in the rock face, a secret cave he and his brother used as a play space, where he proudly pointed out the small, hidden spring that trickled down the rock face, a source of cool, clean water Chunto had clearly missed, trusting only the deep riverbed sources. It was a beautiful example of audience POV, letting the viewer feel the pride of the boy offering his secret. This offering broke through Dine's reserve. The older boy, who had been watching the exchange from the mouth of the alcove, slowly approached Alara later that day, holding a small, rolled piece of bleached animal hide. His face was tense, his inner conflict visible. He unrolled the hide to reveal a crudely drawn map of their surroundings, marking the paths to the easiest foraging spots, the quickest way to climb the treacherous Lizard's Tooth, Spire, and, most importantly, a small, heavily circled mark labeled in simple Apache characters. He pointed to the spot and spoke, not in the defensive clipped tones he usually used, but in a low, urgent voice that conveyed a terrifying, unspoken truth. Whisper, the scout, he knows this place. He was revealing not just a map, but a secret fear, a core vulnerability he had kept hidden, allowing Alara into the true conflict of his internal battle. Alara realized this was the critical moment of first trust, an emotional explosion of necessity. Dine wasn't accepting her as a mother yet, but he was accepting her as a partner against his father's betrayal. She looked at the map, then at the fear etched on his face, and responded with a direct, profound connection to their shared pain. She spoke of her own abandonment, her voice stripped bare of pride. "The man who put me here," she told him, pointing to the spot on the map where the wagon train had passed. "He chose his fear over his sons. Your father chose his fear over you. We are not afraid of the bad choices they made. We are only afraid of losing each other." She sealed the moment by taking the map, carefully folding it and tucking it into the front of her dress, close to her heart and the twins, signifying that his secret, his fear, was now inextricably linked to her own survival mission. The escalation continued that night when Chunto returned, exhausted and grim-faced. The White Scout, Whisper, had been sighted just 30 miles north, moving with a small, focused team. Chunto revealed that his original plan, to simply outweight the patrols, was now impossible. They needed to move deeper into the mountains, toward a sacred hidden place known as the Singing Caves, a journey of 3 perilous days. The plan was fraught with danger, especially given Alara's advanced pregnancy. He told Alara, with a chilling lack of emotion, that if they were caught, the boys would be taken and likely killed by their own father to silence the evidence of his past weakness. The emotional hook was now fully set. The journey was not a retreat. It was a desperate flight to sanctuary, a test of Alara's new resilience and the children's fragile trust. The only way to survive was to follow the painful high-stakes path of the canyon. The journey to the Singing Caves was a 3-day trial that broke Alara down and rebuilt her into a different kind of woman, one forged by the relentless, humbling pressure of the mountain. Chunto set a punishing pace, knowing that the distance between them and Whisper was dissolving hourly. The landscape was brutal, sheer cliffs, icy springs, and endless climbs that left her muscles burning and her lungs aching. Her pregnancy, once a quiet burden, now felt like a crushing weight, a constant physical protest against the unnatural effort. Yet she did not complain. Every time she felt the despair rising, she would look at the backs of the 2 boys, moving with effortless grace, ahead of her, or touch the folded map tucked into her dress, and the pain would transform into a fierce, protective focus. She was the anchor, the necessary weakness that demanded the boys' participation in her survival, deepening the family bond with every shared hardship. The internal triggers of abandonment and the longing to protect her children became Alara's sole fuel. She started seeing the mountainside not as a barrier, but as a map of sanctuary, her mind adapting to the complex rhythms of survival. She taught the boys to listen for the specific cadence of the army horseshoes versus the lighter gait of their pony, turning the sounds of the approaching danger into an audio cue for their defense. Chunto, recognizing her inherent intelligence and her rapid mastery of his lessons, began delegating responsibilities, a powerful sign of his respect. He trusted her to manage the water and ration the food, giving her a sense of control in a world spinning out of control. This pattern break, the shift from rescued dependent to vital logistical partner, was the turning point in their adult relationship, establishing a foundation built not on romance, but on mutual, desperate necessity. On the 2nd day, a major conflict erupted, forcing Dine to finally confront his pain and his responsibility. They were crossing a wide open basin when a distant glint of sun on metal alerted them to the presence of a lone rider, a scout. Chunto immediately ordered Alara and the boys to hide beneath a cluster of massive wind-carved rocks. As Chunto prepared his rifle, Dine, recognizing the rider's distant silhouette and gait, tensed violently. "It is him," the boy whispered, his voice cracking with a horrifying mixture of fear and rage. "It is Whisper. He has come." He froze, momentarily paralyzed by the realization that the betrayal was now physical, immediate, and lethal. He was unable to move, unable to breathe, his small body gripped by the psychological shock of being hunted by the man who should have protected him. Alara acted instantly, recognizing the paralysis of shame and betrayal, an internal trigger she knew intimately. She did not force him to move or yell. Instead, she gently reached out and clasped his hand, her touch surprisingly firm and grounding. She did not look at the approaching rider, only into Dine's desperate green eyes. "He is only a man of fear, Dine," she asserted, her voice low and steady. "He chose the lie. We choose the truth." She did not ask him to be a warrior, but to choose life over trauma. "Help me keep your brother quiet. That is our fight now." The simple, non-heroic task of protecting Yazzie broke the spell. Dine, jolted out of his frozen state by the simple, practical directive, turned his focus from the man who betrayed him to the brother he loved, his face setting in a renewed expression of fierce determination. He huddled close to Yazzie, creating a protective shield, the perfect visual bait of a family, closing ranks under fire. The scout rode past, mere yards from their hiding place, too focused on the high peaks to notice the shadows beneath the rock. As his sound faded, Chonto returned, his face grim. The close call affirmed the urgency of their destination. They reached the mouth of the Singing Caves at twilight, a vast silent cathedral of rock whose entrance was hidden behind a waterfall that shimmered like a veil of silver light. The caves were known as a sacred refuge, impossible to find without precise knowledge, a place where the sound of the wind moving through the tunnels created a low, haunting melody. They were safe, for now. As they settled in, the deep emotional catharsis of the journey settled over them. Elara, utterly exhausted but fiercely triumphant, felt the first sharp, undeniable contraction. The timing was a terrible, powerful twist. The journey to Sanctuary had delivered her to the threshold of birth. "Chunto!" she gasped, gripping his arm, her voice tight with both pain and triumph. "The canyon's children. They are coming now." The cool, damp air of the Singing Caves, meant to be a refuge, was now the sterile, echoing chamber of a desperate birth. The contraction that seized Elara was not a warning. It was a demand, a violent acceleration of the final phase. Chunto, though a seasoned warrior, moved with a controlled panic. He had witnessed countless life and death struggles, but this was different. The fate of his sister's line and the prophesied future of his clan lay with this outcast woman, and the two lives struggling to enter the world. He understood the urgency, the spiritual significance of the birth taking place in this sacred, ancient space. He quickly built a fire using dried cedar, filling the cave with the rich, soothing aroma, and sent the boys to the outermost section of the cave, charging Dine with the solemn duty of maintaining absolute silence and vigilance, an adult responsibility the boy accepted without question. Elara was beyond fear. She was operating on a purely primal level, the internal triggers of pain and protection overriding everything else. The labor was hard and fast, a brutal exchange for the long, arduous journey. Chunto moved with surprising competence, his large hands gentle but firm, drawing upon the ancestral knowledge passed down through the women of his clan. Knowledge he never expected to use. As the waves of pain crashed over her, Elara reached out and blindly grabbed something solid. A heavy, smooth piece of river stone, the same kind of stone she had used in her ritual to bridge the two worlds. She focused on the cold weight of the stone, letting the pain anchor her, pushing back against the tearing agony with a ferocity born of 10 months of shame and 3 days of desperate flight. The climax arrived in a rush of water and sound. The cave, which had been offering its low, humming song of the wind, seemed to vibrate with the sheer, raw power of Elara's screams, a perfect sonic accompaniment to the explosive emotional tension. With a final, desperate push, the first child emerged, a boy, tiny, silent, and fragile. Chunto worked quickly, cutting the umbilical cord with his hunting knife, his face grim with professional focus. But the second child was trapped, refusing to turn, creating a crisis of life and death that threatened to snatch away the victory they had paid for with so much agony. Elara felt the fear, the blinding cold terror of losing the very things she had fought so hard to save, and she screamed a final, wordless curse against the world that had abandoned her. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the cave's echoes, the quick, sharp pounding of hooves outside the waterfall. Whisper and his men had found them. The physical tension of the birth collided violently with the external danger, creating the highest point of conflict. Chunto looked from the trapped child to the cave entrance, his face a study in impossible choices. He grabbed his rifle, knowing he could not leave Elara, but knowing also that the sound of the babies would soon betray them. It was a moment of true, paralyzing conflict, a betrayal by fate itself. Then, the final stunning twist that resolved the emotional stakes. From the shadows, Dene emerged, his eyes wide but his face set with the grim determination of a boy who had finally chosen his path. He spoke to Chunto in rapid, urgent Apache, pointing to a small, nearly invisible fissure high on the cave wall, an emergency escape route known only to the deepest mountain clans. He then turned to Alara, his green eyes luminous with unshed tears, and spoke his final adult declaration. "I will slow them," he said in perfect, clear English, pointing not to the fissure, but to the waterfall entrance. "I know this place. I know how he moves. He will not get past me." He wasn't offering to fight. He was offering to be bait, an expert tracker using his knowledge of his father's tactics to buy them precious life-saving time. He was fulfilling his role as the protector, the true son. Chonto understood the sacrifice. He gave Danae a single silent nod of profound respect, the deepest form of love a warrior could offer. He then turned back to Alara, whose face was pale and drawn, and in that split second of agonizing decision, he applied a final, desperate technique that brought the second boy into the world with a rush. The birth was successful. The sanctuary was breached. Chonto grabbed the second newborn, placed him gently beside his brother, and then looked at Alara, whose eyes were fixed on the brave, small figure of Danae disappearing toward the thundering waterfall. "We go now," Chunto commanded, lifting Alara and the two newborns with superhuman strength, knowing the story was not over. Justice had yet to be served. Chunto's escape through the high fissure was a desperate vertical climb, a final act of superhuman strength driven by the roar of approaching vengeance. He carried Alara, weak but conscious, strapped to his back, the two tiny newborns nestled securely against his chest, their faint cries muffled by the buckskin. The climb was agonizingly slow, marked by Alara's whispered prayers and the sound of muffled shots and shouts echoing from the cave below, a terrifying soundtrack to their flight. Every upward movement was a testament to Dini's courage. Every second of silence from below was a confirmation of his distraction. Alara knew the boy was not fighting. He was performing a ballet of misdirection, using the complex maze of the cave entrance to confuse and delay his vengeful father, sacrificing his own safety to save his new family. The exhaustion of the escape gave way to a cold, burning determination when they finally reached the summit, a high, desolate plateau overlooking the basin. Chonto gently laid Alara and the children down, and she, despite her weakness, reached out and touched the forehead of the second twin, who was slightly fairer than the first, a perfect mirror to Danae's pale hair. She named them Elias and Caleb, names of strength and loyalty. Chunto, his face etched with unspeakable sorrow and resolve, prepared for his final act. He looked down toward the base where the White Scout and his men were still searching the base of the mountain, their movements growing frantic and disorganized. "I go back," Chunto said, his voice flat and absolute. "Dinae must be safe. You wait for the sunrise. Then you travel south. Do not look back." Alara, who had lost everything but gained this impossible family, grasped his hand, her gaze locked with his. She knew this was not a simple rescue. It was a necessary confrontation, a final reckoning with the betrayal that had set this story in motion. "Go not to save him," she whispered, her voice fierce with maternal command, "but to end the hunt. Tell Whisper his sons are free. Tell him the curse of his cowardice ends here." She wasn't asking for revenge. She was demanding justice for dignity, a final pattern break in the cycle of abandonment. Chunto nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her profound understanding, and vanished back down the sheer rock face, leaving Alara alone with her 4 children, facing the cold, terrifying dawn. The resolution unfolded not in violence, but in strategic retribution. Alara waited, watching the rising sun paint the canyon walls in hues of gold and blood red. After an hour of agonizing silence, a single sharp rifle shot echoed up from the canyon floor, a sound that split the early morning stillness. Then, silence. No follow-up shots, no shouts, only the vast, empty quiet of the rising sun. A long time later, Chunto emerged, climbing the plateau slowly, heavily, carrying Dinae slung over his shoulder. The boy was alive, but shaken, his clothing torn, his face smeared with dust and tears of fear and relief. Chunto laid the boy gently beside Alara. He did not speak of the conflict, maintaining the silence of the warrior, but the resolution was clear. The hunt was over. He revealed the final, powerful twist. He had not killed Whisper. He had defeated him in a brief, brutal hand-to-hand fight, disarming him not just of his weapons, but of his identity. Chonto had taken the silver badge and the gold coins Whisper was paid for hunting his own kind, and scattered them across the canyon floor, leaving the former scout alive but utterly stripped of his status and his self-respect, sending him back to the white world as the ultimate outcast, a traitor to both bloodlines. He knows what he has lost, Chunto said simply, looking at Dine and the two newborns nestled safely against Alara. He lives with the shame. That is a deeper punishment than the bullet. As the sun fully crested the ridge, warming the small, huddled family, the story reached its final, empowering conclusion. Alara looked at her four boys, Dine and Yazzie, the sons of the canyon, and Elias and Caleb, the canyon's prophecy. She was no longer the outcast pioneer woman. She was a mother, strong and free, living outside the borders of judgment and conditional love. Chonto stood beside her, his hand resting on the smooth stock of his rifle, not as a husband or a lover, but as a silent, fiercely loyal co-parent and protector. The story resolved itself in a picture of earned peace. The broken woman had found wholeness in the embrace of the family she was rejected for having, proving that the deepest love is found not in comfort, but in the shared, desperate struggle for survival. The five of them stood together, a silent, powerful testament to the fact that the only community that mattered was the one built on courage, necessity, and the profound, unconditional love of a mother for all her children.